welcome to today's session. Lovely to see you guys. So it's a third session of today of our Festival of Co-Production Learning with Age Better. And our today's session is on creating a co-production culture with our team Age Better in Sheffield. So I have majority of the team today, Paul and Imogen on our techie side, so we're in a very good hands, and I have Jilly here, who's our wonderful learning officer, and we have our excellent guest speaker Dave Martin. The session will take us an hour, and it's recorded. You had some instructions, some tips and resources in this morning email, but you're going to have a little bit more after the session. So I'm gonna attempt to share my screen. In today's session, we will hear a lovely interview from Alan Carter, who's one of our Age Better in Sheffield core partners, and Alan will share his reflection and learning on co-governance and co-commissioning. Later on, we're gonna move to a fantastic session with Dave Martin, and as a last part, Jilly will take us to listening to Ignite the Imagination exercise. So I will stop sharing this screen and I will take us to a video with Alan.
Yes, rather an interesting tale in a way. I was actually asked if I would sit on the panel, which was formed by the Sheffield City Council, I believe, in the first instance, to interview various applicants for the job of delivering the Age Better in Sheffield programme. And so I think it was because at the time I was the chair of what was then the Third Sector Assembly, which had been formed up. I think that was the reason why I was invited, but anyhow, I sat on the panel, and after we'd seen a number of potential candidates and applicants for the job, we actually, I think the very last group that we saw was from the South Yorkshire Housing Association, and everybody thought, Housing Association, how relevant is that? Well, we were absolutely blown away with the presentation that we got, and the outcome of it was we were unanimous in our decision that we wanted to ask the South Yorkshire Housing Association to be the lead authority for us to deliver the programme. So I was actually there almost before the beginning, in a sense, and then I thought to myself, this sounds really exciting, and it was put over to us in such a way that we really fell for the whole concept of the Housing Association coming in to do the delivery. And so when I realised that it was something that really did excite me, I thought it would be good to be a part of this as the deliveries rolled out. And so, right from the outset, I was on what became known as the Core Partnership. I think that, as far as I'm concerned, co-production is designed to help to ensure that resources are used to develop the services that people, and in this case older people in particular, actually really want. Co-production is linked with the better outcomes for people who use the services, and co-production helps in its own way to build stronger communities and to develop citizenship. Well, I was thinking sort of quite carefully about this and thinking there are component parts to the whole idea of co-partnership, and there's certainly, if I just refer to my note, it's co-design and co-delivery, co-governance and co-commissioning, and the partnership board is really more involved in the two latter things, the co-governance and co-commissioning, but of course is very much aware of the other part of the partnership, which requires the work to be put in to design and to deliver. So yes, it's all an integrated part in a sense. The Age Better in Sheffield Partnership Board certainly is interested in the design and delivery, but we realise that that is really more the operational side of the job. And so as far as co-governance is concerned, I think it's been, as far as we're concerned, a very light touch really. I don't think we've had the necessity to sort of delve into governance issues, because we've really had such a benefit from the staff who've been employed by South Yorkshire Housing Association and who have served the Age Better in Sheffield project so well, that in actual fact it's been a pleasure. I can't remember a time when we ever had to, for instance, go to a recorded vote because there was great differences of opinion. There were a few occasions when we had to make some decisions which were brought before us, but generally speaking everything has worked in harmony, and the whole thing has been a partnership between the staff who were obviously employed by the South Yorkshire Housing Association but who were devoted to specifically providing the delivery of the Age Better in Sheffield programme, and the partnership board itself, which has been really in place to ensure that everything worked well. And I think we're very conscious of the fact that at the end of the day it is public money that we are responsible for, and I think we need to be ensured that it's being used wisely and well. Well, let me quote to you from your own website. The Age Better in Sheffield is guided by our core partnership, which includes older people, professionals and representatives of organisations across the city. The partnership meets regularly throughout the year. We actually meet probably at 2 monthly intervals as a normal way of working, and we direct the development of the programme. We also provide governance, although as I've said, I think that's been pretty much a light touch on our part, and we just make sure that decisions are made to keep the project moving forward. And I think really that sums it up quite neatly and says what the core partnership is all about. It's hard to say really, because there's obviously personalities involved and people who are particularly anxious to see a project developed in a certain type of way. And I think where there is pressure from individual members to move in a direction which other people are not necessarily entirely comfortable with, there needs to be discussion. But as I say, I don't think we've ever reached the stage where we felt that the partnership board was falling apart or anything like that. I felt that we have actually worked together very corporately. I think the answer to that really is yes. I do. I think, having been involved with local authorities of many years ago, when everything was done for people rather than with people and for their benefit, and with their acceptance of the way in which it was being developed, then I think those days are long since gone. I think it's more partnership now that we should be looking at, so that the people who actually receive and use the services are integrated into the design and development of them. It actually worked a lot better than the first phase of commissioning, because my recollection of the first phase is that we had about 30 people in a room sat around the table. Some of them were bringing their proposals to us, and some of them were officers from the South Yorkshire Housing Association and members of the Core Partnership, and in all honesty it was a bit unwieldy. And so I think we'd learnt our lesson, and the next time we went into the second round, we had the co-partners broke into 2 separate groups, so we had a lot less people involved, and I think probably only 1 representative from the Housing Association present, from the senior management obviously, and that worked a lot better because it was a lot more informal and it was easier to actually talk in a fairly relaxed way about the proposals that the various applicants were bringing in front of us as to why they felt that they would be well suited to deliver part of the programme. So it was, in terms of co-commissioning, organised in a far better way, and I think that the outcomes were actually better, because I think that the second phase has left us with, I think I'm right in saying, 9 projects which are in the main delivering very well and according to the key performance indicators which you have set for them to achieve. I think some people might need to be persuaded that they are actually, their voice is important, and I think if they are users of the service, then it's essential that we actually ensure that they do come across knowing that what they say has got relevance, is going to be heard, and wherever possible is going to be used in the final solution. I think in all honesty that there should be some division, because the core partnership really is there in a more strategic mode in order to take an overview of the whole programme and not necessarily be vitally involved in the day-to-day delivery of that. That is the reason why we have a very excellent staff team in place who actually produce that outcome for us and bring to us any difficulties that they may have encountered and ask for guidance and advice on occasion. And I think that in order to fulfil that role satisfactorily, there has to be an understood division between the operational side and the strategic side. In essence, the core partnership board has something of, as I mentioned before, a light touch, but nevertheless needs to be what you might describe as a hand on the tiller when things go wrong. I think the essential part of a core partnership that it is there to hold the service deliverers to account and to be responsible for the service that they themselves are delivering. Well, I've always had at the back of my mind the 5 ways to well-being. In fact, I've always carried the card in my wallet, which reminds me about it. And the final thing of the 5 things that are mentioned is to give. And I think if you've got something to give, you can find a certain amount of fulfilment for yourself in actually being part of something where you've got something that you feel is going to be of some benefit. I mean, without anybody wanting to blow their own trumpet, I think people who feel that they may have got a skill or some personal attribute which can be harnessed in a way, and I think it could well be that the partnership board has given quite a number of people the opportunity to bring their own skills, knowledge and experience and expertise to the table, and it's amazing they work so well. Yes, I think that it is. I think it's an important part, and it was understood by the core partnership from the outset that it was an integral part of the process. I think that we knew that there would be some projects to which funding was allocated which perhaps would not necessarily be entirely successful or wouldn't be quite delivered in the way in which they'd been put over to us, and I think we had to accept that there's always some benefit to be gained from looking back over the ones that were less successful in terms of there is something to be learned from the experience, and that nothing is actually wasted. Well, I'd have to say that it isn't necessarily a universal solution for everybody, but it's certainly one which has worked for us. And I think it's most important that we say that our experience has been that this is something which we could advocate to other people to adopt, because if it works for us, why should it be that it wouldn't work for you as well? Co-production is a meeting of minds coming together to find shared solutions. In practice, it involves people who are the people who use services being consulted, being included and working together from the start until the end of the project that affects them. Those who use a service are best placed to help to design it, and who are seen as being equal partners and co-creators. We have seen our frontline staff as a group that has engineered this as a way of working, and as a group that has seen it as the way forward.
So that was Alan Carter. Alan was on our core partnership board since the very early days of the session of the Age Better in Sheffield program. We're gonna move now to our next part. Let me share my screen again. And I'm gonna hand over to Julie.
Hello. Can you hear me? Yes, of course you can. I've unmuted myself, which is amazing. I remembered to do it. Okay, welcome everybody. It's lovely to see you all here. I am the Learning Stroke Evaluation Officer for the Age Better in Sheffield programme. I joined the programme almost 2 years ago, so I've been there, yeah, not quite 2 years. And when I joined, it was just before we had our national celebration of the Age Better programme, the 14 programmes across the country. One of the things I was asked to do immediately was to look at presenting a workshop which would showcase our core partnership and co-governance and co-commissioning. So it's absolutely lovely to hear Alan speaking today so positively, because it was something which went right to my heart immediately. It was how wonderful this core partnership was in building and creating a co-production culture for Age Better in Sheffield. You know, if you're going to build something, you need tools. I mean, okay, yeah, you can use your hands, of course, but we know that sometimes what you really need are tools designed to help you build the thing it is that you decided you want to build. And those tools need to be the right tools for the job, and people often need to be trained and encouraged to use them correctly. So having said that, one of the very key tools for us was obviously co-production, but in creating co-production, we needed to rely on strengths-based approaches and creating what we called, or rather what we copied from Nancy Kline, the thinking environment. So those were the tools which were for us the most important in our creation of a co-production environment. And I'm going to speak later on about the thinking environment. But we have with us today Dave Martin. I'm very pleased to say you're going to see him at other sessions during the week, and I think during the next 2 weeks of the festivals, if you are attending other sessions. We're very lucky to have him. He's been a member of the expert panel of the National Lottery Community Fund Ageing Better programme since 2015. So he's very capable of talking about the work of Age Better. He's also acted as a great critical friend to this co-production national project. And I'm very pleased to be able to hand over to him to talk about appreciative inquiry, which is part of this strengths-based approach. Thank you, Dave.
Thank you, Julie. Okay, so I've been asked to talk about appreciative inquiry, and I thought what I'd do is touch on some of the key aspects of appreciative inquiry and put it in the context of creating a co-production environment, from my perspective anyway. So I know that you're going to be getting the presentation available later on. So I've actually produced quite a lot of slides, but mainly from the purpose of them being reference points and links that you can follow up later on. Okay, so if we could have the first slide, please. Hello? Yeah. First of all, I wouldn't profess myself to be an expert in appreciative inquiry, but in fact, I did actually train in appreciative inquiry with David Cooper Ryder in the States. David Cooper Ryder and his colleagues at the Case Western Reserve University devised the methodology back in 1987. And I remember him talking about the foundation of appreciative inquiry in the analogy of golf. He was an avid golf player, and he said, you know, when you're on the driving range and you're about to tee off, whatever you do if you play golf, obviously I don't, he said you can become really obsessed with trying to avoid hitting the ball into the woods or into the rough. And he says that actually can overwhelm you if you're only focusing on the problem. He said what you need to be thinking of is where you want to be, i.e. on the green. Next slide, please. Next slide. Yeah. Okay, so David actually devised the whole program in relation to looking at how his children were playing basketball. He was filming them in practicing and in playing, and what he would do is then edit the films and edit out all the bad play. And when he coached them by playing back the film, he would then highlight what was working well and build upon their strengths. Hence the whole terminology of appreciating what works well. And he said that their actual performance improved incredibly. Next slide, please. Aha, so those of you who may have heard of appreciative inquiry have heard it referred to as the 4D model, or in fact 5D. Some people refer to it as 5D. The fifth D being in fact what is the heart of the whole process, the affirmative topic, or in fact define is the fifth D. And that's quite an important aspect, the crafting of the quest, as we might call it, the define. It is then followed by the discovery process, which is using very powerful, thoughtful questions, which actually look for the energy behind the what works well, and then moving on to the dream phase and the production of what are called provocative propositions. And then the next stage, which is the design stage, co-determining what actually one should do in building upon what works. And then the final one is delivery or destiny, as it might be. So as I say, the process is very much about an inclusive process and actually getting into the heart of what works rather than problem focusing. One of the models, one of the times that I've actually used it in the past with colleagues some years back was to look at hospital discharge. Interesting enough, I suspect the hospital discharge continues to be a bit of what they call a wicked issue, and it certainly was then. But what we did was to involve a very wide and diverse range of interviewers, looking at the journey of people going into hospital, staying in hospital, and then coming out of hospital. And so that included patients, family carers, paramedics, doctors, nurses, auxiliary staff, receptionists, GPs, adult social care. And what we actually did was have people work in teams in very kind of unusual partner processes and interviewing each other about what was appreciated at different stages of the whole process, the whole journey. And some really interesting insights came out of that, quite surprising for quite a lot of different partners within the whole process of the journey into hospital and coming out. fundamental to that was the crafting of that quest. And rather than saying hospital discharge, you know, it's a problem, what do we do about it? How do we fix it? We crafted a quest which was something along the lines of, together, how do we maximize the patient's experience to best advantage in their journey into, through, and out of hospital? So a very different way of basing understanding what has worked and how we can design things that work better from that experience. Can I have the next slide, please? So underlying all of this is the whole issue of questions. And as David we often would quote, we create our destinies by the questions we ask. We could spend hours talking about what is a positive question, what is you know, a powerful question, but it's basically one which seeks to uncover and bring out the best in a person, a situation, or an organization. Next slide, please. Okay, just very quickly, the things that I would just highlight, I suppose, from my experience is the important thing, obviously, is really getting an appreciative approach to what you want to change, where you want to be, the kind of visioning of what it is that's really important that you want to see different. Very, very important to make sure you've got the senior buy-in in not only just to implement whatever comes out of this whole process, but actually to be opening doors, particularly when you're taking up time interviewing people, etc., particularly in places like hospitals, for example. What I particularly love about the whole process is the use of creativity and imagination on the part of individuals' experiences. You know, not actually researchers talking academically, but actually people and how they've used it, whether they be users, whether they're deliverers in terms of staff, etc. What's brilliant, obviously, apart from the inclusivity, is the unusual perspectives. It was very interesting to hear, for example, doctors actually having to sit down with patients and carers and listening to their perspective in the process of what they appreciated, rather than the professional view of the medical outcome, as it were. And obviously, the underpinning process of this is respect, valuing, and of course, appreciation. If we can have the next slide, please. For those of you who are very familiar with improvisation and enjoy and love improvisation, the foundation of improvisation techniques are the yes and. The yes of acceptance and appreciation, and then building upon that to the and, taking it forward. Next slide. Okay, well, I've slipped this in, as you probably would expect me to, and for several reasons. One is the Better Government for Older People programme. The whole foundation of that was the engagement and inclusion of older citizens. And I was really interested in the whole, it came up earlier today in the launch, where we're sometimes so keen to grasp the latest thing and actually get very enthusiastic about, you know, what's happening now. And we tend to overlook what's happened in the past and forget that, and actually kind of end up reinventing the wheel. But not only that, we actually disregard all of the contributions and the work that has gone before. Have the next slide, please. And I've picked out from that report, which is way back in 2005, a couple of things which I think still stand. The first is the phrase older people. What the hell do we mean by that? And I speak for my people here. You know, when you think about the range of ages from what, 50 to 100, people born in 1930 to people born in 1970, what the hell do we mean? The difference of experiences there. If we have the next slide, please. There's a quick indication of the kind of diversity of that age span in terms of characteristics. And next slide, please. And these are the sort of not just circumstances, but characteristics. You can see the huge range that there is, let alone, you know, gender, ethnicity, or sexuality, for example. We really need to be a bit careful when we bandy around this term older people. What the hell do you really mean in that? What is your real target and focus? Can we have the next slide, please? Okay. I was reminded of a conversation I had some years ago now with a fire officer from the Merseyside Fire and Rescue Service. They'd just been awarded the Beacon Council Award for their services for older people. they'd actually dramatically reduced death and injury from fire in the community amongst older people. And they were very proud of that, and they were very, very enthusiastic about that. And this chap was telling me that he'd been briefing the staff, you know, the fire officers, before they were about to go out into the community with this fire safety message. And they were really, really kind of raring to go to save older people in the community, to go out there and actually take that fire message, the prevention message out there. And he said, whoa, hang on a minute. He said, before you go out there, take a moment. These are people who've actually survived, gone through 2 world wars. They've brought up families, they've got children, grandchildren, even great-grandchildren. They actually know a thing or two about life. And the important thing is to acknowledge and appreciate lived experience. I've never forgotten that. If we can just move on to the next slide, please. One of the things I wanted to pick up before we move on to CANOPY was the whole thing about the ethos of appreciative inquiry, or in fact any of the co-production methods, and that is the values that underpin co-production, collaboration, whatever you want to call it. And that is not just appreciation, but valuing and respecting individuals. Okay, we used to say you can't do AI, you have to be AI. It's not so much what you do, but the way that you do it. Okay, now I'm now working with an organization called CANOPY, which uses social imagination to be writing, as it were, new narratives of aging across the life course. And I wanted to just flick through a couple of the methodologies that we've been using, which you might find of interest. Next slide, please. Before I go on to those, if you haven't seen this article, I really urge you to read it because I think it's fantastic. It's written last year by Jeff Mulgan, who was the CEO of Nesta. And he highlights that the world is facing a deficit of social imagination. And the decline of imagination matters because societies need a wide range of ideas and options to help them adjust, particularly to big challenges like climate change and aging. We need to think differently. And there are many methods available which can be used to stimulate imagination. Next slide, please. One of these is public narrative. I've got the link at the bottom of this if you're interested in following this up at some point. And next slide, please. And the 3 horizons framework. One of the things I think we sometimes tend to forget in the co-production process is actually having some kind of co-designing of a vision for the future, which drives us forward. That's the whole appreciative inquiry ethos, is actually what's energizing, what's empowering people and taking passion to move things forward. So next slide, please. So here's some thoughts and challenges, I suppose, in these last 2 slides. I'm always interested in what drives any kind of program organization, about who cares and why are they caring. And I'm really interested in the idea of what the whatever, design, production, delivery, what it might be. And how do we create the we in co? There's such a feeling sometimes of a kind of us and them. We incorporate them in what we're doing, but actually, how do you truly create a level playing field to have a we in the co? Obviously, the challenge is always about reflecting diversity. And for a program such as Aging Better, which was focusing upon social isolation and loneliness, a huge challenge. Who's actually in the process of choosing who gets to be included? And always for me, how do you actually include those who would really best benefit, those that are less confident or disenfranchised? Last slide, please. So I'm always interested in how we stretch these concepts of co-production. Where do we go next? And the big one for me is about ownership. Where are we on co-ownership of any programs, organizations? Where do we stand with a relationship with cooperatives, for example? And funding. I mean, heck, you have to admit, it was the community fund, the big lottery, that put aside over £70 million over the past few years. How do we look to sustain things in the future where we could be looking far more on different ways of co-funding or even co-resourcing, so you can mix, not necessarily just financial contributions as such? And so I'm going to leave you with this challenge. It's how might we co-create programs in our communities which are drawing upon our creativity and imagination and empowered with passion to vision and create sustainable futures for all ages, not just those older people. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you, Dave. That was very, very interesting. And I especially like how we put we in the co. That is definitely left me thinking. I'm going to hand over now to Gilly, who will lead us through the next stage of today's session.
Well, Dave, that was great. I'm feeling very inspired. I'm so glad that you were able to join us today. I picked up on something you said towards the end. You know, this issue of the decline of imagination, and the need to think differently. And I'm rather pleased because this leads me on very nicely to talk about, and you can see the book there. I'm going to hold it up here. It's Never Far From My Side, Time to Think, Nancy Kline. You know, it's one of those books it's good to have have sort of within easy reach. Got a lovely picture there of somebody deep into enjoying reading that book. The quality of everything we do depends on the quality of the thinking we do first. So if we talk about decline of imagination and the need to think differently, how are we going to achieve that? Well, Nancy Kline started thinking about this a very long time ago, back in 1984. She started thinking about this from the point of view of her work as an educator. She was working in consultancy and teaching, but in the field of education. She was not, in fact, a business person. And whereas now we hear more about time to think in terms of its advantages for businesses and corporate and all the rest of it, originally this idea came from the fact that Nancy Kline was concerned that children and young people should grow up knowing how to think independently and knowing how to think well. And that for her was the starting point for developing the thinking environment, which I said, has been going on a long time. Obviously, she's now published books. You've had already a link in our resource to know where you can find those books. She's appeared in many TED Talks. She's a very well-known name in business circles, but I think it's very interesting to think that in the initial phase, her whole idea was based on how do we produce quality independent thinkers. And that for me is really the core to our program as Sheffield Age Better, because we wanted people to think from the very beginning about what it was they wanted. And so our core partnership was founded on the principles of time to think. We brought those principles into the core partnership. We said, okay, we have a very diverse group of people here joining us as core partners. We have people from very different backgrounds, but the components of Nancy's time to think principles are, first of all, that we have to give attention to each other. So we have to listen. That when it comes to thinking, we're actually equal. We're equal thinking peers. Yes, we may have someone in the room who's an expert in one area, and we may have someone else who's a well-known author of another particularly, detailed topic. But when it comes to thinking together, we are all equal and we are peers. There are 10 components. I'm not going to go through them all. You can read about that later on in the resources we're going to give you. But those ideas that you found things on attention, and on the idea that we are equal when it comes to listening, we are equal when it comes to thinking, and that we are also welcoming diversity. It doesn't matter if we're a diverse group of people. We're not asking everyone to think the same. We want to welcome the fact that people think in different ways. What we don't want is a uniform way of thinking. So if you take those principles on board and you put them into your core partnership, you're going to build a very strong core partnership who are then going to go on to co-govern and co-commission in a way which allows your program to grow and develop. And I believe from my, my 2 years with Age Better in Sheffield, that is what has happened. And the time to think principles can, I think, really enhance anybody's work, whether it be as a volunteer, whether it be within actually, your personal relationships, or whether it's in the work environment, those principles can really make a difference. Thinking for yourself, Nancy Kline says, is still a radical act. Wow. So if you want to commit a radical act today, we are encouraging you to think for yourself. But what produces an environment in which you can think for yourself? Well, Nancy Kline, again, has a very clear view of this. She says it's the quality of the listening we do. If I know I'm going to be listened to, if I know I'm not going to be interrupted, if I have the confidence to know that my turn will come, I'm not going to be overlooked, and that when my turn does come, you will listen to me with attention, then you will be able to enable me to do my best thinking. So it's a contract between the speaker or the thinker and the listener. So in exchange for agreeing that you won't interrupt me, I agree to be brief and succinct in what I say. I'm going to put this into practice in a moment by doing something that Nancy calls rounds in the thinking environment. This is what you would do perhaps in a meeting situation, or when you wanted to do some brainstorming, you wanted to get some ideas out there. But the principle is that you want everyone to have a turn. And this is a gift to the introverts, because we all know that there are those of us who find it quite difficult to, and someone is talking over you. In the thinking round, everyone gets a turn. Everyone gets to speak. Everyone gets to be heard. There's no interruptions. So in a moment, we're going to actually put you into breakout rooms. I think Paul is in charge of that, so I'm not going to worry too much how that's going to happen. And you're going to get to practice this. And I would say to you, if there's nothing else you take away from what I've said, apart from the fact I've rambled a lot, rounds are a great way to get the best thinking from the people you care about, or the people you work with, or the people that you want to consult with or co-produce with, or whatever it is that you're looking for, because we do need people to think for themselves. And they can't do that if we don't encourage them by listening. Listening and thinking go together. I listen, you think. If I listen better, you will think better. So you don't need to introduce yourself when you get into your breakout room, because obviously that will take time, which we don't have. I'm really sorry. But just agree the order in which you're going to speak. There should be 4 or 5 of you in each group. Just agree who's going to go first, second, etc. Everyone takes a turn. No one interrupts or interjects, not even to go, oh, yes, oh, that's good. No. Whilst the person is speaking, we have complete concentration on the person speaking, and each person gets to have their turn. When that person finishes, the next person starts. If you get to the end of it and you have time, you can go on to the second question, which will give you even more opportunity to think and ignite your imaginations. So the first thing you're going to think about when you go into your thinking rounds is that question there in front of you. Thinking back over the last year, and we all know an awful lot has happened in the last year, what has been your biggest challenge and what have you learned as a result? That'll go into the chat box, by the way, so don't worry if you can't remember it. If you get to the end of that in your round, then go on to the second question. What is the most significant change for the better you have made during this time? So if you're not speaking, please don't sit there thinking about, what am I going to say? Oh, is it my turn? Please try and practice that listening to ignite the imagination. So we've got 2 skills we're practicing here. We're thinking and we're listening. Okay, Paul, would you like to go ahead and send people away to consider that first question in their thinking round? Thank you.
People slowly coming back in. I think we've lost a couple of people along the way. So there were some groups, I believe, where there were only 2 of you.
Everybody's back now.
Everybody's back now. Thank you, Paul. We slowly coming into the end of our session today. Are there any burning reflections or burning questions, guys, you might have, you would like to send our way right this moment before we close the session? Any comments, any reflections?
Just to say, what a really positive session, and I love the whole idea of not asking people what their backgrounds are when we do ideas labs with a real mix, and particularly when I'm working with people who have dementia. There's a huge power imbalance sometimes. I'm always trying to reduce, and we're always sort of, oh, tell us about yourself. Well, actually, yeah, do you know what? I'm going to try this on the next one now. Just you know, it doesn't matter who we are or what our backgrounds are.
That's great, Jane. That's lovely to hear.
Really, and I think, well, like Jenny and I were talking about this, in the fact that you know, you may have a position of something, or you may have before you retired, but actually that may not be about who you are actually, and what your identity and self-identity is all about. So it could be just an empowering moment to just be yourself. You know,
exactly, and that I think this idea that, you know, that Nancy wanted to come to with, you know, children, this idea that everyone has the possibility to be an independent thinker. You know, it's not down to background, position, money. We can all be empowered to be an independent thinker. Editor, can you put that resource up in the chat so that people have those if they do want to explore a bit further? There's also a link to a really good talk which gives you some more exercises if you're interested in knowing more. But I just would say, and I'm getting no commission for this whatsoever, get hold of the book if you haven't read it. Go on to the internet, look at the TED Talks, there's so much stuff on there. But yeah, I feel it's changed my way of thinking a lot.
There you go, it's all in the chat now, but you will get a nice little copy of our today's presentation with all the informations and link that Dave touched on today, as well as Julie's information. Well, we coming to the close of the session. It was lovely having you guys. It actually felt, I think, quite nice because it was quite a small, intimate group, and it felt like even two people in a group, it's enough to have a time to listen and to think. So, as you know, there is plenty more session over the next 3 weeks of our festival. So whatever grabs your interest, please do get a free ticket. Any questions, any reflections, any comments on how we did and what we can do better in the spirit of test and learn, please do let us know. We're open to criticism as well, but please be kind to us. And thank you very much for your time. And I hope to see you on other sessions. Take care, guys.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.